On my 21st birthday, I got the text that destroyed my world. Sold your tablet. Your sister needs a new phone. His next demand? Pay for her $3,000 trip to LA or get out of the house forever. What he didn't know is that one text message would unravel a decade of financial fraud and a family secret that would change everything. What would you do when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you have to fight to survive? My name is Isabella, and this is my story. The world for me has always started on a screen, not the doom-scrolling blue light insomnia kind of screen, but a pristine 24-inch universe of my own making. My Wacom Cintiq 24 Pro. It wasn't just a piece of equipment, it was an extension of my soul. It sat on my desk like an altar, the absolute centerpiece of a room that was less a bedroom and more a miniature animation studio. Every dollar from 2 years of slinging lattes, enduring cranky professors, and saying no to late-night hangouts was poured into this magnificent slab of glass and technology. And on its surface, my future was taking shape. This morning, my 21st birthday, was no different. The early morning sun cast long shadows across my desk, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny sprites. My focus was absolute, my pen tracing the final delicate light trails of a falling star. This project, Stardust, it was everything. My senior thesis, my portfolio, my one-shot ticket to a summer internship at Lightbox Animation, the kind of place where dreams are rendered into reality. Each frame was a heartbeat, each color choice a word in a story I was desperate to tell. The smell of brewing coffee and something vaguely burning finally pulled me away. Breakfast, the ritual I both needed and dreaded. I padded downstairs into the kitchen, the familiar tension already coiling in my stomach. My mother Linda was at the counter scrolling through her phone with a laser-like focus, a spatula forgotten in a pan where a pancake was slowly turning black. "Oh, happy birthday, honey," she said, her eyes not leaving the screen. She gestured with her thumb toward the table. "For you." On the table sat a gift bag from a drugstore. Inside, I found a birthday card with a generic glitter-shedding 21 inches on the front, signed in my mother's loopy script, and a thick mustard-yellow sweater that looked like it would be itchy even from a distance. It was a size too large. It was always a size too large. My father Mark shuffled in, already dressed for work. He gave my shoulder a quick, clumsy squeeze. 21, kiddo. Wow! He mumbled, his eyes darting around the room, never quite landing on me. He pressed a folded $20 bill into my hand. Get yourself something nice. The main event, as always, was already in progress at the table. My sister Haley, 18, and reigning queen of our household, was holding court with her phone. "I cannot believe Tiffany posted a beach pic with the same filter I used yesterday," she announced to no one and everyone. "It's so cringe. Should I call her out in my story or just block her?" I sat down, pushing the sweater aside. "Morning, Haley," I offered. She glanced up, her eyes flicking over me with zero recognition before returning to her screen. "Oh, hey, Dad, I need a new ring light. The one you got me makes me look sallow." "We'll look at some this weekend, sweetie," Mom cooed, finally scraping the charred pancake into the trash. The entire breakfast was a highlight reel of Haley's life, her follower count the brand that wanted to send her free lip gloss, the unbearable drama of being a burgeoning influencer. It was like watching a television show I'd never chosen to turn on. I just sipped my orange juice, my mind drifting back to other birthdays. My 16th, the small party I'd planned, canceled at the last minute because Haley landed a non-speaking tree role in the school play and needed the whole family there for support. My high school graduation, the $100 my grandmother had sent me, which mysteriously transformed into the down payment for Haley's prom dress, because it was a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Isabella, you understand. I did understand. I understood perfectly. "You know, Mark," Linda said, her voice taking on that specific airy tone she used when she was about to spend money. "We really need to think of Haley's upcoming trip as an investment. This LA convention could be her big break. All the top people will be there. I caught my dad's eye for a split second. I saw a flicker of something, stress, maybe a weariness that was deeper than just being tired, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual placid mask. Before I left for my shift at the daily grind, I went back to my room, a learned habit, a quiet ritual of self-preservation. I draped a soft microfiber cloth over my Cintiq screen, a shroud to protect it from dust spills or a borrowed makeup brush. Then I picked up my external hard drive, its little blue light blinking reassuringly, and plugged it into my laptop. Drag-drop copy. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, backing up every precious frame of stardust. You don't leave your heart unlocked when you live with a kleptomaniac whirlwind. The coffee shop was a welcome escape. The smell of roasted beans, the low hum of conversation, the familiar faces of my coworkers. My friend Maya had even snuck in a small cupcake, a single candle burning brightly on top. "Make a wish, birthday girl," she whisper-shouted, her grin infectious. Surrounded by people who saw me, who remembered, without being reminded, I felt a genuine warmth spread through my chest. For a few minutes I was just a normal 21-year-old laughing with friends, stealing frosting with my finger. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and blew, and then my phone buzzed. A text message. From Dad. My heart gave a little hopeful flutter. Maybe he was texting to say something more, something real. I swiped it open. The words appeared on the screen, stark and brutal against the white background. "Sold your tablet. Haley needs a new phone for her LA trip. Be grateful for everything we do for you." The air left my lungs. The cheerful noise of the cafe faded into a dull roar. I read the message again and again. It didn't make sense. It was like my brain refused to process the sequence of letters. "Sold your tablet." My fingers, suddenly clumsy and cold, trembled as I tried to call him, straight to voicemail. His voice, cheerful and recorded, echoed in my ear. "Hey, you've reached Mark. Leave a message." I hung up, a wave of nausea washing over me. My cupcake sat on the table, the single plume of smoke from its extinguished candle rising into the air. Like a tiny dying star, the world didn't just narrow, it shattered. I don't remember saying goodbye to my friends. I don't remember the drive from the coffee shop. My hands were on the steering wheel, my foot was on the gas, but I was somewhere else, floating in a cold, silent space, reading those same 10 words over and over. "Sold your tablet. Haley needs a new phone." The world outside my windshield was a blurry, meaningless stream of color and light. The only thing real was the hollowed-out cavern that had just been carved into my chest. My phone buzzed again as I pulled onto my street. This time it was my mother. My thumb, acting on its own, slid open the notification. "Your father told you. It's for the best, honey. Her career is taking off. We all have to make sacrifices." The word sacrifices struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was the word they always used, a clean, noble word to dress up the ugly truth of what they were doing. It was the word that had erased my 21 birthday party, my graduation money, my time, my energy, and now my future. The shock that had frozen me began to thaw, replaced by a slow, creeping dread that felt like ice water filling my veins. By the time I parked the car, the dread had sharpened into a single focused point of anger. I rehearsed what I would say. I would be calm, I would be logical, I would explain the years of work, the internship, the thesis. They were my parents. They had to understand. They just had to. I walked through the front door, and the scene in the living room stopped me dead. My father was sunk into his recliner, his eyes glued to a golf tournament on TV. My mother was perched on the edge of the sofa, beaming, and in the center of the room, sitting on the floor amidst a sea of pristine white packaging, was Haley. She was holding up a sleek new iPhone, turning it over and over in her hands like it was a sacred relic. "The camera's low-light capability is insane," she was saying, her voice filled with a breathless awe. "My night reels are going to be epic." The space on my desk, the empty gaping wound where my Cintiq had been, flashed in my mind. The box that came in the one I had kept so carefully in my closet was gone. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice came out as a strained whisper so quiet I wasn't sure I'd even spoken. Haley glanced up, annoyed at the interruption. My father flinched, sinking deeper into his chair. Only my mother met my gaze, her smile unwavering. "Isabella, we just discussed this," she began, her tone gentle, patronizing. "Don't make a scene." "Where is my tablet?" I said again, louder this time. The words felt like broken glass in my throat. "Honey, it's for the family." Linda started launching into the monologue I knew was coming. "Haley has a real opportunity here, a real chance to build something. We have to support that. Family supports each other. You're drawing. It's a lovely hobby, but this is a career. This is business." Haley scoffed, finally peeling her eyes away from her new device. "It's just a drawing thing, Isabella," she said, as if explaining something to a small child. "This is my actual job. My job. The hours I spent sketching, storyboarding, animating. The commissions I took to help pay for my supplies. The 2 years of serving coffee and cleaning up after strangers. All of it erased. Reduced to a drawing thing." "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that was finally boiling over. "That was mine. I bought it. You had no right to sell it." My father still wouldn't look at me. "I demand to know where it is," I said, my voice rising. "How much did you sell it for?" Linda sighed, a long, theatrical sound of a mother burdened by a difficult child. "Oh, for heaven's sake, we sold it on Facebook Marketplace. Some guy from a town over picked it up this morning. I think we got $500 for it. $500 for a $2,500 piece of professional equipment." My breath hitched. I felt dizzy. "You did what?" "We needed the cash quickly, Isabella," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's done. Now we need to move forward." I just stared at her, a bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling up inside me. "Move forward. You stole from me. You stole my work, my property, and you expect me to just move forward." Linda's face hardened, the soft maternal mask falling away. "Fine," she snapped, her voice turning to ice. "If you can't support this family, then you can contribute in other ways. Haley's trip to the influencer convention in LA next month will cost about $3,000. We'll need that from you by the end of the week." The laughter that escaped my lips wasn't humorous. It was a raw, broken sound of disbelief. "You want me to pay you after you stole from me? Are you insane?" That's when my father finally spoke. He muted the television, and the sudden silence was deafening. He turned his head and looked at me, his eyes cold and empty. "Then you need to leave," he said, his voice flat. "We can't have this negativity in our house." He pulled out his phone, his thumbs moving with a detached efficiency. A notification popped up on my screen. "Your cellular plan has been modified by the account owner." The signal bars at the top of my screen vanished, just like that. Numb. That's the only word for it. I turned without another word and walked up the stairs, each step feeling heavy and surreal. I moved on autopilot, my mind a hollowed-out shell. I went to my desk to grab my laptop and my external hard drive, but the hard drive wasn't there. The small black rectangle that held my entire thesis, my portfolio, years of my life, was gone. A fresh wave of panic so sharp it made me gasp, cut through the numbness. I grabbed my backpack and started shoving things inside. My laptop, my old smaller graphics tablet, a few changes of clothes, important documents from my desk drawer. Each movement was jerky, disconnected. My life was being packed into a single, worn-out backpack. As I walked down the stairs and toward the front door, Haley looked up from her new phone, which was now encased in a sparkly pink case. "Can I have your desk chair if you're not going to be using it?" she asked, her voice casual, disinterested. I didn't answer. I just opened the front door, stepped out into the cold afternoon air, and pulled it shut behind me, the soft click of the latch sounding as final as a gunshot. I drove. I don't know for how long. The suburban streets of my childhood blurred into a meaningless watercolor of manicured lawns and identical houses. Each one looked like mine, a perfect facade hiding something rotten inside. My phone was a dead brick in the passenger seat. My home was no longer my home. I was unmoored, an astronaut with a severed tether spinning out into the empty, silent dark. There was only one name, one place, that managed to cut through the static in my head. Leo. His apartment building was a 3-story walk-up that smelled perpetually of old pizza and damp laundry. It had never looked more like a palace. I climbed the stairs, my backpack feeling impossibly heavy, each step a monumental effort. I stood in front of his door, number 3B, my hand hovering over the wood. For a moment I almost turned back. The thought of showing up on his doorstep a broken homeless charity case. The humiliation was a physical weight. But where else could I go? I knocked the sound, barely a tap. The door swung open. Leo stood there in gray sweatpants and a faded video game t-shirt, a half-eaten bowl of cereal in one hand. He was mid-sentence, ready to complain about a late-night coding session, but the words died on his lips the second he saw my face. His easy smile vanished, replaced by an immediate sharp concern that cut straight to the heart of me. "Izzy," he breathed out. He didn't need to ask another question. He just set the bowl down on the floor, grabbed my arm, and gently pulled me inside, shutting the door behind us with a soft, definitive click. And in the safety of that small, simple act of kindness, I shattered. The story came out in ragged, ugly pieces. I collapsed onto his lumpy sofa and told him everything, the words punctuated by gasps and sobs I couldn't control. The text from my dad, my mother's voice calling it a sacrifice, Haley and her new phone, the $3,000 demand, my phone plan, gone, kicked out. All of it tumbled out in a messy, incoherent heap. Leo just listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just stood there, his arms crossed, and his expression slowly hardened from worry into a quiet, simmering fury. I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. When I finally ran out of words dissolving into shaky silence, he began to pace his small living room like a caged tiger. "I'm going to kill them," he muttered, running a hand through his dark, messy hair. "No, seriously, Isabella, this is unbelievable." He stopped and looked at me, his eyes flashing. "Okay, first things first." His anger was a strange and unexpected comfort. He wasn't pitying me. He was angry for me. He sprang into action, a man with a problem to solve. He grabbed my laptop from my backpack, opened it on his cluttered coffee table, and then typed furiously on his own keyboard. "I'm turning my phone into a hotspot," he explained. "You need to get online, check your email, your bank account, everything." I watched him work the methodical clicking of the keys, a steady rhythm in the chaos of my mind. It was more soothing than any hug could have been. He got my laptop connected, then tried a few things on his own machine. "Yep," he said, his voice tight. "The phone plan is completely terminated, cut off, like you never existed." As I stared at the screen, trying to get my bearings, a new colder wave of dread washed over me. I did a mental inventory of my room, of what I had left behind. My clothes, my books, my desk chair, and then my blood ran cold. "Oh my God." I whispered the words catching in my throat. Leo stopped what he was doing. What is it?" "My hard drive," I said, my voice barely audible. I looked up at him, my eyes wide with a terror that dwarfed everything else I was feeling. "Leo, my external hard drive. It was on my desk. I didn't see it when I packed." The color drained from his face as he understood. "Izzy, no, your thesis." I nodded, a fresh set of tears blurring my vision. "Everything," I choked out. "Stardust, my entire portfolio for the Lightbox application, animations from the last 3 years, all of it. It's all on there." The Cintiq, that was the tool, that was replaceable, but the hard drive, that was the work. That was my proof of existence, my soul. The panic that seized me was absolute, a suffocating physical certainty that my entire identity had just been wiped from the face of the earth. Leo stared at me for a long moment, his own anger momentarily forgotten in the face of my utter devastation. Then he pulled his desk chair over and sat down directly in front of me, forcing me to meet his gaze. His eyes were no longer just angry, they were sharp-focused, strategic. "Okay, listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "Listen, you can fall apart later. Right now, You have to get smart." I shook my head trying to speak, but he held up a hand. "No, I'm serious, Isabella," he continued, leaning forward. "This isn't a family squabble anymore. This isn't a misunderstanding. They didn't just sell your property. They stole your future. The tablet, the hard drive, the money, the car loan you mentioned. This is a pattern. This is calculated. This is a crime." His words were like a splash of ice water. Crime. The word hung in the air between us, stark and dangerous. It cut through the grief, through the hurt, through the shock. It changed the entire shape of what had happened. This wasn't a betrayal by people who were supposed to love me. It was an attack. I looked down at my own reflection in the dark, silent screen of my laptop. My face was pale, my eyes red and swollen. But behind the tears, something new was starting to form. The helplessness that had been drowning me began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard ember of resolve. He was right. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand and met his eyes again. The storm of my grief was over. The still that followed was something else entirely. It was the quiet, deadly calm of a coming war. Sleep was an impossible luxury. The night bled into early morning in Leo's apartment, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a shared simmering rage. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my gut, but now it had a purpose. We were strategizing. My lumpy sofa cushion became a war room. "Okay, we need an archive," Leo said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "A fortress. I'm creating a folder on my private server. 256-bit AES encryption. Not even a government agency could get in there without a warrant and a team of geniuses." He looked at me, his expression serious. "Anything you find, you photograph. Upload it immediately. No hard copies left on you." On a legal pad between us, we started a list, a timeline of betrayal. It began with the big things, the Wacom tablet, the missing hard drive, but then the smaller cuts, the little death by 1,000 paper cuts that had been my life, began to surface. My first semester, I recalled, my voice quiet. My textbook money, $200. My mom said she needed to borrow it for a plumbing emergency. Leo wrote it down. Plumbing emergency, $200. The internet bill. I added a bitter taste in my mouth. I've paid it for the last 6 months. Dad said it was because my animation files took up so much bandwidth. But really, it was so Haley could have uninterrupted streaming for her live sessions. Internet. $450, he scribbled, underlining it twice. On and on it went. The phone bill I covered for 3 months. The money for car repairs that I never saw again. Each memory was a small indignity on its own, but listed together. It was a damning indictment. It was a pattern. A meticulous, long-term campaign of financial exploitation. The plan was simple and terrifying. The next day my parents would be at work. Haley, according to her slavishly followed online schedule, had a brand collab photo shoot at the Botanical Gardens. The house would be empty for a 3-hour window. I was going back in. Using my key felt like a violation. The familiar click of the lock sounded alien, conspiratorial. The house smelled the same of Linda's lavender air freshener and something faintly like regret. But the silence was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy listening. I felt like a burglar in my own life, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I went to my room first. It was worse than I expected. Not just messy, but picked over. Several of my favorite sweaters were gone from my closet. My expensive art history textbooks were missing from their shelf. It was a petty, thoughtless ransacking, and it made my stomach clench. Then, Haley's room. Her door was wide open. The room was a chaotic explosion of clothes, makeup, and shopping bags. And there, on her vanity desk, plugged into her laptop, was my hard drive. Its little blue light was blinking frantically. On her screen, a progress bar was slowly moving forward under a heading that read, "Deleting files to free up space." A wave of nausea and white-hot rage washed over me. I lunged forward and ripped the cord from the USB port. Haley hadn't even known what she was doing. She was just erasing years of my life to make room for another vapid vlog. I clutched the drive to my chest, its plastic casing warm. I felt sick. The last stop was the one I dreaded most, my father's home office, a place I was never allowed to enter. I pushed the door open, my breath held tight. It was neat, orderly, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. I went straight for his desk. The drawers were locked except one, the bottom right. I pulled it open. Inside were neat stacks of files, old bills, insurance papers, and underneath them, a plain manila folder with no label. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. Inside were bank statements, theirs and mine. They had been getting paper copies of my student account statements sent to the house. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the columns of withdrawals. And then I saw them, highlighted in yellow. Cash withdrawals from an ATM near my dad's office on days I was in class. $50 here, $100 there, small enough to go unnoticed if I wasn't paying close attention. But that wasn't the worst of it. Tucked in the back was a document that made the air leave my lungs, a loan application for a 2-year-old Honda Civic, Haley's car. And there on the cosigner line was my name, my social security number, and a clumsy forged version of my signature. They had used my good credit, the credit I had carefully built with my student loans, to secure a loan for her. The betrayal was so deep, so profoundly vile, it almost buckled my knees. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling with the camera app. Snap, snap, snap. I photographed every page, every fraudulent withdrawal, every line of the forged application. The evidence felt toxic in my hands. I stumbled out of the office, leaning against the hallway wall, the hard drive clutched in one hand, my phone in the other. This was too much. The stolen money was one thing, but identity theft fraud I was in over my head, drowning in the filth of their secrets. I needed an adult, a real one. My thumb moved across my phone's screen, scrolling through contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years. Aunt Carol, my father's estranged older sister, the family black sheep who had called my parents financially and morally bankrupt at a Thanksgiving dinner 5 years ago and hadn't been invited back since. I pressed the call button, my heart hammering. She answered on the second ring. "Isabella?" Her voice was sharp, surprised. "Aunt Carol?" I started, my voice cracking, tears I didn't know I had left finally starting to fall. I need help. Something terrible has happened." I told her everything, the words spilling out in a rush. The tablet, the hard drive getting kicked out, the stolen money, the car loan. When I finished, the line was silent. For a long, terrifying moment, I thought she had hung up. Then I heard her take a deep, slow breath. Her voice, when it came, was sharp as flint and held not a trace of surprise. "I knew this day would come," she said, her tone devoid of any pity, only grim certainty. "Don't talk to them again. Don't text them. Don't answer their calls. I'm on my way." The 90 minutes it took for Aunt Carol to drive from her suburban home to Leo's city apartment felt like an eternity. I spent most of it pacing the worn rug in his living room, the recovered hard drive clutched in my hand like a fragile bird's egg. Leo, bless him, gave me space. He sat at his own desk, headphones on, a determined frown on his face, as he began the delicate, painstaking work of trying to resurrect my digital ghost. The quiet, rhythmic clicking of his keyboard was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. When the knock finally came, it wasn't timid like mine had been. It was a sharp, decisive rap, rap, rap that radiated pure, unadulterated competence. Leo opened the door, and Aunt Carol swept in like a force of nature. She was exactly as I remembered from that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer and sharp trousers, her silver hair cut in a stylish, no-nonsense bob. She carried a leather briefcase in one hand and an air of absolute authority. She took in the scene in a single sweeping glance, me pale and trembling. Leo surrounded by a fortress of monitors, the general chaos of a college bachelor pad. Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue, landed on me. "Isabella," she said, her voice crisp. It wasn't warm, not exactly, but it was solid. It was real. "Let's see what we're dealing with." We sat at Leo's small dining table. I pulled out my phone and with trembling hands swiped through the pictures I had taken in my father's office. I uploaded them one by one to the secure folder Leo had created, my own personal archive of ruin. Carol watched the images appear on her tablet, which she'd produced from her briefcase, her expression unreadable. She zoomed in on the forged signature on the car loan, then on the highlighted cash withdrawals from my bank statements. She was silent for a long time, just scrolling, absorbing. Finally, she set the tablet down and looked at me, her blue eyes narrowed to piercing slits. "This isn't just irresponsible parenting, Isabella," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "This is a felony, several in fact. What you have here, this is bank fraud, identity theft, and larceny." She spoke the words with such clinical precision that they seemed to hang in the air, suddenly heavier and more terrifying. She then proceeded to explain it to me in a way I could understand, breaking down their campaign of theft into a series of debits and credits. "They leveraged your financial stability," she explained, gesturing to my bank statements. "They used your good credit you earned as collateral for their own sinking ship. They didn't see you as their daughter in these transactions. They saw you as an unsecured asset." As she spoke, Leo let out a low whistle from across the room. We both looked over. "What is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He said, his eyes wide. "I was able to bypass some of the corrupted sectors. I'm recovering some files, Izzy. It's not everything. A lot of it is scrambled, but it's a start." A single tear of pure, unadulterated relief slid down my cheek. A start. It was more than I'd had an hour ago. "But," he continued, his tone shifting, "there's something else. I ran a diagnostic on the drive's cache. It looks like your parents, or someone, installed a keylogger on the family desktop computer. Months ago." I stared at him confused. "A keylogger," Aunt Carol answered before he could. "It's spyware," she said, her voice laced with ice. "It records every keystroke, every password you typed, every private message you sent on that machine. They captured it." The memory of logging into my bank account on that computer just before Christmas flashed in my mind. The sickness I felt was profound. They hadn't just stumbled upon an opportunity, they had set a trap. While Leo continued his digital archaeology, Carol turned back to her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen with a speed that belied her age. "Your father may be a fool, but he's a predictable one," she muttered. She made a few phone calls, her conversations clipped and professional, full of terms I didn't understand. She was pulling up public records, property deeds, tax liens, painting a picture of my family's finances that went far beyond my stolen savings. After nearly an hour of intense, focused silence, she let out a soft, bitter sigh. She turned her tablet around to face me. On the screen was a property record from the county clerk's office. "They took out a second mortgage on the house 2 years ago," she said flatly. "A massive one, for $150,000. I just stared at the document, the numbers blurring together. 2 years ago, but why? Carol's gaze was unflinching. "When was Haley's first attempt at becoming a fashion mogul?" she asked. "The one with all those artisan t-shirts she had made?" The memory hit me. Haley surrounded by boxes and boxes of poorly printed shirts she'd designed, crying because no one was buying them. My parents comforting her, telling her it was a great first try, that they'd handle the leftover inventory. They had spent thousands. "They are in catastrophic debt, Isabella," Carol said, her voice softening just a fraction. "They're not just broke, they're buried. The money from your account wasn't a bonus. It was triage. They've been plugging gaping wounds with your birthday money." She looked at me, then her expression a mixture of grim resolve and something that looked almost like sorrow. "They didn't sell your tablet for a phone, honey," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "They sold it because they are drowning. And they've decided to use you and your sister as life rafts." The legal battle became a low, persistent hum in the background of my life. It was a series of emails from Ethan calls with Aunt Carol and documents that needed signing, but it was no longer the raging inferno at the center of my world. My parents' bankruptcy filing had ironically set me free. Their fate was now caught in the slow, grinding gears of the legal system, a machine I trusted Ethan and Carol to operate. My job was to build something new on the scorched earth they had left behind. My focus turned inward. The work for Professor Albright was a godsend. It was more than a paycheck. It was a sanctuary. For hours a day, I would sit in a quiet editing suite at the university headphones on meticulously cleaning up digital noise from film scans or perfectly balancing the color grade on a scene. It was calming, methodical work. I was restoring order to someone else's universe, and in doing so, slowly restoring my own. With the money from the university's emergency grant and my first few paychecks, I found it. A small, sunny studio apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brick building, just a 15-minute walk from campus. It wasn't much, a single large room with a tiny kitchen alcove and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, but it was all mine. Leo helped me move in on a Saturday. My worldly possessions fit into the back of his hatchback with room to spare. There was no furniture, just a few boxes of clothes, my art supplies, and an air mattress we inflated in the middle of the polished wooden floor. That night after we'd eaten pizza sitting on the floor, Leo left and I was alone. Truly alone. I stood in the center of the empty room, the moonlight streaming through the large window. I walked over to the door, locked the deadbolt, and leaned against it, listening to the quiet hum of the old building. The feeling that washed over me was so powerful, so exhilarating, it almost brought me to my knees. It was the feeling of safety, of sovereignty. This space, this door, this lock, they were mine. No one could enter without my permission. No one could take anything. No one could throw me out. It was a foundation, the first one I'd ever truly had. My new family, the one I was choosing, began to take shape. Aunt Carol would drive into the city once a week, taking me out for dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant. She never talked about the case unless I brought it up. Instead, she'd ask about my classes, about my thesis. She'd tell me stories about her own career, about being a woman in a male-dominated field in the 80s. She was giving me a blueprint for a life built on competence and self-respect. Leo was my rock. He was the one who helped me hang curtains, who showed up with groceries when he knew I was too busy to shop, who would sit in comfortable silence with me while I worked on my art, his presence a steady grounding force. Professor Albright became a true mentor, connecting me with his own contacts in the animation industry, critiquing my rebuilt portfolio with a sharp but encouraging eye. Slowly, I was building a support system, a small constellation of people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. And then there was Haley. Her healing journey ran parallel to mine on a track I never could have predicted. She started seeing a therapist, a recommendation from the university that Aunt Carol had quietly paid for, and she got a job, a real humbling apron-wearing job, at the Daily Grind, the same coffee shop where I had worked for 2 years. Our first meeting there was excruciatingly awkward. I walked in to get coffee before class, and there she was, struggling with the espresso machine, a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. Our eyes met across the counter, and for a second we were both frozen. "Hi," she said, her voice small. "Hi," I replied. "Can I get a large black coffee?" We started meeting like that once a week. Cautious, stilted conversations over a countertop. We talked about classes, about the weird regulars at the coffee shop. We didn't talk about our parents. We didn't talk about the lawsuit. We were like two strangers from the same foreign country learning a new language together. One afternoon, she slid my coffee across the counter and then slid a folded bill next to it. It was $100. "What's this?" I asked, confused. She wouldn't look at me, focusing instead on wiping down the counter. "It's a start," she said quietly. "I've been saving my tips. I know it's nothing, but it's mine to give." I looked at the money, then at my sister, really looked at her. Her manicured nails were chipped. She looked tired, but she also looked real. More real than she ever had before. I pushed the bill back towards her. "Keep it," I said gently. "Buy your textbooks for next semester." The gesture was enough. The acknowledgement was everything. Inspired by all of it, the betrayal, the fight, the fragile hope of reconciliation, I turned back to my art. Stardust couldn't be the same story anymore. It felt naive, dishonest. I sat at my new desk in my new apartment with my old, smaller tablet, and I started over. I kept the name, but the story changed. It was no longer a simple fantasy about a star-catching girl. It became an allegory. The protagonist, a young cartographer of the cosmos, has her most precious map, the one showing the way to a mythical light-giving nebula stolen by those she trusts. They tear it apart using the pieces to light their own fading world, left in darkness, shattered, and lost. She discovers that the ink she used to draw the map, the stardust itself, is still inside her. She learns she doesn't need to find the light. She can create it. My work took on a depth it never had before. My pain, my anger, my grief, I poured all of it into the animation. The character's frustration as she tries to tape the map back together, her quiet resolve as she grinds new pigments from glowing cavern stones, her final triumphant moment as she draws a new, more brilliant galaxy across the empty canvas of the sky. It was my story, and for the first time it felt true. The day of the bankruptcy hearing was gray and overcast, the sky the color of dirty dishwater. It felt appropriate. The courtroom itself was small and deeply unimpressive. There was no jury box, no dramatic gallery, just worn wooden benches, scuffed linoleum floors, and a tired-looking bailiff who was scrolling through his phone. This wasn't a place for grand speeches or dramatic revelations. This was where financial lives came to be quietly dissected and, in many cases, put to death. I sat between Ethan and Aunt Carol, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Across the room on another bench sat my parents. My father looked hollowed out, a man whose bones had been scooped out, leaving only a sagging suit. He stared at his own shoes, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. My mother, however, was rigid with a defiant pride. She wore a pearl necklace, her makeup perfect, her expression a mask of wronged dignity. She was playing a role for an audience that wasn't there. The proceedings were a blur of legal jargon, motions, petitions, creditor lists. It was methodical, dry, and soul-crushingly boring. When our case was called, Ethan stood and spoke in a calm, measured voice. He didn't raise it. He didn't point fingers. He simply presented the facts, the forged loan, the unauthorized withdrawals, the affidavit from Haley detailing the discovery of the drained educational trust. He laid out the evidence brick by brick, building an inescapable fortress of truth. Their lawyer, Mr. Peterson, offered a weak defense, painting a picture of desperate parents making mistakes of good intentions gone awry. But his words were like sandcastles against the incoming tide of Ethan's evidence. Finally, the judge, a woman with weary eyes and an air of infinite patience, looked over her glasses at my parents. She had reviewed the documents Ethan had submitted. She had seen the proof. This court acknowledges the petition for Chapter 7 bankruptcy filed by Mark and Linda Miller. She began, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. However, she paused, and in that pause I felt my mother stiffen beside her lawyer. This court also finds that certain debts listed herein were incurred through acts of fraud and defalcation while acting in a fiduciary capacity specifically concerning the educational trust and the fraudulent acquisition of an auto loan in Isabella Miller's name. She looked directly at me for the first time. Therefore, she continued, pursuant to 11 U.S. Code Section 523, the debt owed to the plaintiff, Isabella Miller, is hereby ruled non-dischargeable. Ethan had prepared me for the words, but hearing them spoken aloud in the quiet, dusty courtroom, it was surreal. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, the court orders a structured repayment plan to be established garnishing a percentage of any and all future earnings of the defendants until the debt is satisfied. The family home at 427 Oak Street is to be sold to cover the outstanding secured debts, including the second mortgage. She shuffled a paper, and the court orders the immediate removal of Isabella Miller's name and liability from the auto loan held by Westgate Financial. It was over. There was no gavel slam, no dramatic music, just the quiet, methodical force of the law dismantling my parents' life of lies with the cold precision of a demolition crew. Justice, it turned out, wasn't a lightning bolt, it was just paperwork. As we walked out into the hallway, Ethan put a hand on my shoulder. "We did it, Isabella," he said, a genuine smile on his face. "This is a total victory." Aunt Carol just gave my arm a firm, satisfied squeeze. but I felt strangely empty, detached. I had expected to feel something, joy, anger, relief. Instead, I just felt quiet. The noise that had filled my head for months had finally stopped. "You know," Ethan said, his voice softer, "we can still talk to the DA's office. Given this ruling, they'd have a slam-dunk case for criminal charges." I looked back through the window of the courtroom door. I saw my father, his head in his hands. I saw my mother, her mask of pride, finally crumbling, her shoulders shaking. They weren't powerful anymore. They weren't monsters. They were just two sad, broken people who had destroyed everything, including themselves. "No," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I turned back to Ethan. "No, they've lost everything. Their house, their credit, their everything. That's enough." The victory wasn't about punishing them. I realized it in that moment. The victory was about this silence in my own head. The victory was my freedom. The final goodbye happened a week later in a small, sterile conference room at Ethan's office. It was the last time I would have to see them. There were papers to sign releasing me from the car loan, acknowledging the terms of the judgment. My father wouldn't look at me. He just signed where their lawyer pointed his hand, trembling slightly. My mother, however, had one last performance left in her. After she'd signed the final document, she looked up at me, her eyes swimming with manufactured tears. "Isabella," she said, her voice a breathy, pleading whisper, "after all this, we're still your family." I looked at her, at this woman who had chosen a lie over her own child time and time again. I saw her not with anger, not with hatred, but with a profound and weary clarity. "A family doesn't do what you did," I said, my voice quiet but firm. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a statement of fact, a truth as solid and immovable as the judgment against them. I hope you find a way to heal." I looked from her to my father's bowed head. "Goodbye." I stood up, turned around, and walked out of the conference room without looking back, the soft click of the door closing behind me, the final definitive end. 1 year later, to the day, 22, the date didn't bring a shudder of fear anymore, just a quiet, profound sense of disbelief. A year ago, I was a ghost haunting the sofa of a friend's apartment, my entire world a pile of ash. Tonight I was sitting in the velvet-cushioned darkness of the Northgate University Auditorium, a finalist in the annual animation festival. The air buzzed with the electric energy of artists and dreamers. My own little studio apartment, my sanctuary, was waiting for me back home, a lease with my name on it, safely tucked away in a desk drawer. And in my email inbox, an official offer letter for a summer internship at Lightbox Animation sat waiting for my acceptance. My dream, the one they had tried to extinguish, was coming true. I wasn't alone. To my right, Leo sat, his shoulder warm against mine. He didn't say anything, but every so often he'd give my hand a quick, reassuring squeeze. Beside him was Aunt Carol, looking as regal as ever, a small, proud smile playing on her lips. A few seats down, Professor Albright gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. And next to him was Haley. She looked different. Her flashy brand-name clothes had been replaced by a simple, stylish dress. Her hair was cut in a way that framed her face instead of hiding it. She looked confident, grounded. She looked like herself. She caught my eye and gave me a genuine, hopeful smile. My found family, my true north. Then the lights dimmed completely. The festival host announced the final film in the student showcase. And now, the voice boomed, a film that tells a powerful story of loss and creation. Here is Stardust by Isabella Miller. My heart hammered against my ribs as my own work filled the massive screen. I saw the young cartographer, my proxy, my avatar. I watched her lose her map, watched her despair in the darkness. But then, I watched her find the strength to grind new pigments from the glowing stones of her own sorrow. I watched her raise her hand to the empty black canvas of the sky, and in the final breathtaking sequence, I watched as she painted a new galaxy into existence, a swirling, brilliant nebula of her own design, more beautiful and complex than the one she had lost. When the credits rolled and my name appeared on the screen, the auditorium was silent for a beat, a collective held breath. And then it erupted. The applause wasn't just polite. It was a roar. It washed over me, a physical wave of acknowledgement of being seen. I barely remember walking to the stage when they announced I'd won the top prize. I remember the weight of the small glass award in my hand. I remember looking out at the faces of my friends, my family, and seeing nothing but pride. Later, amidst the congratulations and the buzz of the reception, I found a quiet corner to catch my breath. I pulled out my phone. There was one text sent just a few minutes before, from Haley. "Happy birthday, Isabella, I'm proud of you." And beneath it there was a picture. It was a photo of an official-looking letter printed on the letterhead of our local community college, an acceptance letter for a 2-year associate's degree program in early childhood education. She was building her own world too, on her own terms. The celebration back at my apartment was small and perfect, just a few friends' pizza and cheap champagne. After we'd eaten, I brought out a large flat box I had hidden in my closet. I got myself a birthday present," I announced, my voice a little shy. I lifted the lid, and there it was, a brand new top-of-the-line Wacom Cintiq 24 Pro. Its black glass surface gleamed under the warm light of my apartment. It wasn't a replacement, it was a reclamation. I had bought it myself with the prize money from the festival and the salary from my research position. Leo let out a low, appreciative whistle. "There she is," he said softly. Aunt Carol just smiled, a tear glistening in her eye. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I stood by my large window looking out at the endless glittering tapestry of the city lights. The new Cintiq sat on my desk behind me, not an altar of anxiety, but a quiet promise of work to be done, of stories yet to be told. The past year had taught me so much. That family isn't always the one you're born into, that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet rustle of paperwork, that the deepest betrayals can sometimes lead to the most profound truths. I thought about my parents. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel much of anything, really. They were just people. People who had lost their way so completely, they had tried to dim my light to keep their own darkness at bay. I hoped for their sake that they would one day find their way back, but their journey was no longer mine to watch. My story wasn't one of loss, not really. The girl who had her world shattered on her 21st birthday didn't exist anymore. In her place stood a woman who had learned a vital, unshakable truth. You don't need someone else's permission to shine. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize you have the power to create your own universe. And for that, for the chance to build this new galaxy, the one that was entirely, completely mine, I was grateful. Looking back on that year, it's strange. I wouldn't wish that kind of pain on anyone, but I wouldn't trade the person I became for anything. The journey from the girl who had her world shattered on her 21st birthday to the woman sitting here now, it taught me a few things I feel are worth sharing. The first and maybe the most important lesson is about value. For years, I let my worth be defined by people who saw me as a resource, not a person. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who could be counted on to sacrifice. I thought their approval was a prize I had to earn, but it's not. Your worth, it's inherent. It isn't a gift that others can give you, and it certainly isn't something they have the power to take away. Don't ever let someone's inability to see your light convince you that you don't shine. That leads to the second lesson, about family. I lost the family I was born into, and for a while that felt like an amputation. But then I discovered that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up when the storm hits. It's about the people who hold a lantern for you in the dark, who believe in your future, even when you can't see it yourself. It's the friend who gives you his couch, the aunt who becomes your general, the professor who sees your talent through your trauma. Sometimes the bravest act of self-love is choosing to build a new family that respects and nurtures your spirit. And finally I learned about pain. That night my world fell apart. I thought the pain would destroy me, but eventually I learned to see it not as a wound, but as a resource. It became the ink for my art, the fuel for my fight. It gave my work a depth it never had before. True freedom isn't the absence of walls. It's the realization that you hold the blueprints to build your own doors. Your deepest scars can become your greatest strengths if you learn how to use them not as something to hide, but as a map of where you've been and a testament to the fact that you survived. My story had an ending, but I know for many people situations like this are ongoing and far more complex. It makes me wonder, what would you have done in my situation? At what point do you think the line was crossed from a family problem to something that required intervention? Do you believe that walking away like I did is a form of strength? Or do you think there's always a path back to forgiveness, even after such a deep betrayal? If this story made you think, or if it resonated with a part of your own journey, I'd be honored if you shared your thoughts in the comments below. Everyone's perspective is different, and there's so much we can learn from each other. And if you believe in the power of stories to help us navigate our own lives, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are many more journeys to share, and I wouldn't want you to miss the next one. Thank you for listening.